checking Twitch. There we go.
Yes, yes. Yes, we are. I'm just sharing this on my social feed.
Yeah.
Four people in here. In our, what is it? Is it the 24th, 25th? No, we restarted the count when Dom joined. It was the 20th show. Dom said he is now the 5th time there. So this week is the 25th edition of open.clouds.dev. Welcome. And as always, just a commercial plug in the beginning. As always,
Oh, yes, please. The Cloud Report, sponsoring open.clouds.dev. Sorry, David, it's tradition. You all have to go through this.
today. Because last time when I sang it, Dom was like, "Whoa, what's that?" I decided I'm not going to do that. We have, as you might see, an awesome guest here. And that guest is David Santo. He is, damn it, he is pretty important at GitLab. Pardon me on that, David. I give you the room to introduce yourself because you can do that better. But before you start, I got to know David several weeks ago when we did an interview with the Cloud Report. By the way, the interview is online at the Cloud Report's YouTube page. And what I've seen then is somebody who was so amazing that I thought, like, we need to make that happen. We need to make it happen that he is here, because that was one of the interviews where you basically just ask something and you have somebody, Dom and Chris, basically contrary to what we usually do, who is speaking with a purpose, with knowledge, with an opinion. And I was like, wow, I want to have that more
Adding
often.
class to this format.
Yeah, but we don't.
You set the bar really high, Carson.
No, David. That is the way you basically presented yourself, and that was so awesome to see. So I figured you need to join us. Although, again, it's more or less a punishment for you, but good things come always with a trade-off. So, David, welcome, and perhaps introduce yourself.
Thank you. So my name is David DeSanto. I'm the director of product for our secure and protect stages at GitLab. Those are our security offering that's embedded within the DevOps lifecycle. The secure side focuses on application security testing. So we're testing your application using things like SAST, DAST, fuzz testing, and that's all pulled together with our vulnerability management. And then our protect side is focused on cloud native security. So protecting your applications when they're pushed out into a Kubernetes cluster. And we have both a container host security, which is focused on intrusion prevention, file integrity, application allow listing. And then we have a container network security offering, which is essentially a cloud-based firewall that sits within your cluster and protects traffic going between pods.
Ooh.
Lots of cool stuff.
Yeah, I'm afraid it is. And the problem
I was counting I've been in sales for quite some time in open source and Linux, and I was counting all the buzzwords.
I just wanted to say that.
Someone on the line can explain them all, so that's pretty cool.
Well, we got the security in there. That's usually a buzzword, and I mentioned cloud native. So I got those two down, and then the details became a little bit more complex.
Security, oh yeah.
But I think actually you aimed quite cleverly because once you mentioned the cloud native, you immediately provided a framework for that when aiming for Kubernetes. So actually, you made sure that you know what you're talking about once you went for cloud native, and so okay, cool, that makes a lot of sense. So we can actually follow up on that. So well used buzzwords, I'd say.
And if
Thank
I
you. Thank
remember
you.
properly, Dom, we had a show up until recently, and that show was called Cloud Nights in English. And one of our episodes was about security, and that was amongst the best we could have, right? And I got under the impression that you, Dom, have a knowledge on that as well. So I figured it would make a lot of sense to have you guys just talk with each other. But we make that a little bit simpler, a little bit relaxed, because we have the tradition that everybody, damn it. Thank you, Carsten. That everybody can basically introduce us a website or a topic of the week. And I would like our guest to start with that. David, what shall I browse for you? What is your news of the week?
So the article, if you were to Google for probably FBI source code ZDNet, should pull it up. If not, I can grab the link.
Look at this brave man. We're on a live show and he's typing into.
We're going to see all of his bad auto matches. That is it. Yep.
Oh, holy crap.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting article. Yeah, it's a very interesting article. I will point out that it does talk about a competitor of GitLab's, as well as a partner. I don't want to highlight that part of the article because I don't think, to me, that's not the takeaway of the article. It's not about how a tool vendor made a mistake. I think it's actually a story of why permissions, proper authentication settings, things like auditing regularly your configurations are super important when it comes to security and when it comes to the cloud. And that's my takeaway from the article. For everybody as a high level, this article talks about how the FBI identified that several government agencies and private corporations had their source code leak online. And the reason for that comes down to private or the default passwords not being changed in deployments. And when you look at, so when you look at today's world, there's a quote that I like, which sometimes people don't always enjoy, but many years ago, somebody said the cloud is just someone else's computer, right? And when you think about a cloud infrastructure, there is no such thing as that private brick and mortar walled off area. So if it's online, anybody can get to it. And if you have that mentality, you can begin to see how default passwords become a problem. Not changing default port numbers in your environment can definitely come back to haunt you. I'm actually interested because Christopher reacted to that by shaking his head, did a full face palm.
I mean, you know, as a security expert in a cloud native world, as you mentioned, do you actually get a good night's sleep? Because what we've been talking about a lot is, you know, people pushing to the cloud, everything's just a click away. Basically, you buy a predefined package, a predefined piece of software. Nobody could probably even say, is it secure? Is it, you know, via some standard or the other? It's just in the App Store, and I'm hoping with that it's certified. But what's your take on all of that?
Yeah, I think especially with the proliferation of cloud being used for everyone for anything, you highlight something really good. So when I'm not working at GitLab, I like to work on side projects. I'm writing an app that leverages the cloud, right? Everybody does that, right? It's like it's the easiest way to scale your business, your organization. But all the things you can make assumptions of previously, whether that is, hey, it's in my data center, and only like these three people can get into the room. I know it's physically wired this direction. Like all those things just go out the window. And so when you ask if I can sleep at night, I do actually sleep through the night. I wouldn't say that relates to whether or not this is a concern, but to me, I can't stress enough the simple things you can do to secure yourself and prevent those things, or at least lower the risk for you. And so, for me, the first thing I always go to, the reason why I wanted to reference that article in this conversation, it's like leverage two-factor authentication. Like I can't, in my life, I've not found an application that doesn't support two-factor authentication. Whether it's something like it supports like Google Authenticator, which I can put on my phone and type in the unique PIN. Whether it is somebody that has a full integration with like an Okta or a Ping identity, there are lots of things you could do to get a two-factor environment set up. Also, change your default passwords when you're setting up the application. I'm human. I'm pretty sure that the three of you on this call are human, though Karsten might be a robot. I'm not sure. Like, we're going to forget things. We're human. So while you're there, change the password. Don't leave it the default.
So there's stuff talking security. There's stuff like OAuth, which is an open source authentication security tool. Is that secure? Can Open be secure?
Open can be secure. One of the things I studied, I actually went back and got my master's degree a couple of years ago. So I got my master's from NYU in cybersecurity. It's a very fun program. But the one class we took in there was cryptography. And everybody talks about security is best when you obfuscate. Like, I don't tell you my password. I don't do this. I don't show you my source code, whatever the case is. Security is better if you can be open about it. And that's why cryptographic algorithms are public. They're not this like private kept secret. So that way you can actually validate it is secure. You can get people to review it for you. I will say, like, GitLab being an open core company, we take advantage of that a lot. We have customers who are constantly looking at our source code. So maybe they'll highlight something. We can go, oh, wow, you're right. We can fix that for you. We've also had customers who go like, hey, I saw this. Let me fix that for you, and then let you know I fixed it, right? So security through obscurity doesn't work. It just gives you a false sense of security.
One question. Actually, a few years ago, I came across another guy who was also like quite famous for security solutions, etc. And he was speaker, I think, at the DEF CON in Las Vegas. And he pointed out that we are running into a scenario where security system-wise is actually not too hard to achieve, because we do have a lot of very intelligent systems and setups, etc. We do have the right people in the right places, for example, like you, knowing how to address new security areas like cloud native and container infrastructures. So actually, usually the tech is quite up to date with the current threat potential. But in the end, it always boils down to the user getting hacked. So one keyword that has risen over the last years, of course, is social engineering. But also, sometimes you don't need social engineering if it boils down to a sheer layer 8 failure and dumbness by not basically changing the goddamn password, or having like root is your main login or your default settings. And of course, these are, even if it's in your own data center where you think things to be safe, the kind of programs that you are using, the kind of infrastructure, the digital infrastructure that's in use is prone to the exact same, let's say, attack vectors. So
that's a very good point. Yeah, I usually kind of add another layer to that. There was a great presentation at Black Hat a couple years ago, and in the presentation, and it was actually done by Mudge, who's one of the old school hackers, still doing some great work in the world. But in his talk, he talked about the scale at which commercial and enterprise software lines of code is growing exponentially, but the code to exploit a vulnerability has kind of stayed almost flat over the last 10 to 15 years. And it kind of speaks to the challenge to the presentation you're referring to. Very complex, and it's unique to you and your organization, and that is where that exploit then hits, right? So we can talk about default usernames and passwords. That's obviously really bad, but if you're not testing your application or taking steps to secure your application, you're opening up your threat landscape so large that there's going to be a chance that somebody's going to find something if they look hard enough.
Yeah, I did have a conversation with Polyverse on another show that I do, and we were talking zero-day exploits and how complex everything is getting with, for example, stateless vehicles like containers. You know, it might be there, it might be not. If I do have a bug in the code, that could be problematic. I've been reading that the larger scale companies actually outsource their coding and pay their coders via line of code. And, you know, just thinking about principles like that, that really doesn't make sense, because then all these important topics like quality, consistency, security are just in the background, and people, you know, will just be producing for the buck. And I think that's really, really dangerous. So, I've been seeing security plop up more and more and more over the last months, with everybody kind of living in a digital world, everybody being heavily dependent on these workflows. So it's always really, really interesting to hear kind of what the backgrounds are, what precautions are being taken to make me as an end user who's maybe not even technical safe.
Maybe in that case, this ties in the topic that you brought up, Chris, I think like 3 weeks ago, maybe 4, about low code and no code.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a question for David. How do you think, or how do you see security compared to, let's say, an ever more growing approach to low code and no code environments? So where basically code gets written for you. And
yeah, I think the common security best practices still apply, because the low code, no code environment is going to generate something that can be scanned by security tools to make sure that output is secure. I think it becomes a bigger challenge, because if you do find something, how do you remediate it? I think that's a challenge that no code, low code is going to have to deal with. The other part of that is you're going to take that application you build in that no code, low code environment and put it out somewhere in an operations environment or production environment. Even if that's an internal environment to your organization and not, say, live on the internet for anybody to look at, you should be trying to find ways to secure that, whether that is putting intrusion prevention in front of it, monitoring for like code drift inside the application, things that somebody can exploit or leverage to get access. You touched on something interesting, like with social engineering. It's amazing how low that bar can be. All build up trust, right, with the applications we use, with the people who provide those applications. There's a really great book on social engineering that I read that gives examples of people just walking up to somebody in like a food court at a mall, which obviously we can't do right now with the pandemic, but and just being able to position themselves sound like they work for a bank, and how they could help that person out who's having a conversation about a new loan or paying off debt or whatever, and getting information like social security number, username, passwords, account numbers, and that sort of thing. And again, that all applies in that no code, low code environment. So in your experience, Dom, like when you're looking at that, what areas have you looked at with low code and no code with regards to cloud or with regards to security?
Actually, for me, since, as I said, I'm more on the infrastructure side of things, but of course, we do get the requests from customer side that keep striving for more easy to use systems and setups. So basically, the old DC in your own cellar is more or less dead, and also handling with it, and it all goes more down to like basically having processes as a service, however you define that exact process, whether it's your database, your services, your homepage, etc. So from infrastructure side, you get more and more heaps of layers that get stacked on top. So what we can do from a data center perspective, or what basically has been my core approach, is I know how I can make systems resilient. I know how I can mitigate, for example, physical attack vectors like DDoS attacks, etc. But I know the more I put on top of it, the vulnerabilities start with basically what kind of platform do you provide. If you have a bare metal machine and you have root access for the end user, because actually, I mean, it is a dedicated machine. But this, of course, also makes it prone for our infrastructure to be vulnerable. So because we cannot force, let's say, specific security tools or audits onto dedicated machines that are basically run from other customers. But of course, if they screwed up, probably they will have damage, etc. But so now actually it's interesting to see if we have this push towards less direct coding on the machines. That on the one side, I think, is a huge step forward for even further spread cloud usage in a secure way. We had this look out into the future with like data vaults, etc. Carsten can dive into that. And I think if the low code, no code thing is done right, it can be a great blessing.
Hey, but we're all already using low code and no code. If you've ever been in a CRM system like Salesforce, that's no code and low code. Normally I'd write a HTML, PHP page. There I enter information. What else do we have? We have so many systems where we're creating workflows, processes, pages. If you've ever used a CMS system, Drupal, WordPress, something like that, that's all low code and no code. But what annoys me so bad is through kind of the complexity behind of all of these topics, I've been in a couple situations where vendors that I use will kind of pull the parent trick. Kind of, we know what's best for you. We're trying to help you. And actually the most ridiculous example is I bought, like a while ago, I bought a nice little hard disk because I wanted to save data locally. And since I really was impressed by what these cloud hyperscaler companies can offer, I wanted the functionality for myself. So I bought a cloud hard disk, which basically is a disk with a little main board, some RAM in it, and you can access it via the internet.
I had the same. Yes, they put the plug, right?
It was fucking hilarious because I wanted to go onto my hard disk some nice day to get some old files. And when I clicked onto the hard disk on the My Computer view in Windows, it actually took me to a web page. And I was like, no, I don't want to go to a web page. I want to have my files. And it just wouldn't. It would always take me to this page with a login and asked me to log in. And then when I called up Western Digital and asked what the hell was going on, oh, well, Mr. Branston, this is for your security. Because we can't ensure, since you've connected your hard disk to the internet, that you have security standards in place at home. So we've taken care of that for you. And now it's ridiculous. Now, if I want to use my own files, I need to connect to the internet and download my own files that are like literally next to me via a route that goes via the US and back to my home to get my own data. And I think that was something I've as you can see, I'm emotional about that. That's something.
Certainly so.
Wow, I was stumped when that happened, and basically I kind of did something funny, which was I told them I'd have my lawyer contact them, or they send me kind of a rollback to an older version so I can use my files again. And hearing lawyer and them being a big company, they did. But basically now I have to use an old, unsupported, insecure version of a software to host my files on a piece of hardware and a service I paid for. Doesn't that suck?
No, you kind of touch on two things that are very interesting there for the audience who's watching this. So the first one, I'll do them in reverse order. So I'll talk about the one thing you just talked about last. So there is this overarching theme of, especially in the residential space. So like a thing for your house, like you have, I'll use a story from my past, not my ISP today, but an ISP prior shipped me their router, and they're like, use this for Wi-Fi, use this for everything. You don't need anything else. I, as a security person, like the little voice popped up in the back of my head, like, this can't be secure, right? And so I was like, okay, well, I'll turn off the wireless on it because I'm going to use my wireless that I have better control over. And I would notice after a week or two went by, I would see the router offering Wi-Fi again, which again was not configured because I turned it off. And I saw this pattern repeat and repeat. And I called them and they were like, well, you don't understand. Like every so often we need to push on new firmware. It's going to reset some of the settings. But don't worry, it allows you to have the best, most secure things possible. And I kind of went the route you did, and I can't remember if I threatened lawyers, but I was kind of like, this is in my house. It's not yours anymore. And after a couple more weeks went by and I noticed this pattern, I decided that I'll just put my own firmware on their device. And thus I did that, and that locked them out. And then they noticed that, and they called, and they're like, hey, we're trying to connect to this port number on your router. It allows us to monitor it for its health, whatnot. I'm like, yeah, don't worry about it, it's on. Yeah. And so to your point, like I think people are smart, to kind of use like, traditional like politician type talk. Like everybody's smart, right? We all need to have our own responsibility in how we secure ourselves. And that's whether it's your house, whether it's at work, whether it's the cloud, whatever. The other thing you said at the beginning is using CMSs. And I think there's this common misconception that I'm grabbing this thing, whether it's a low-code, no-code system, whether it's a CMS, that is actually secure. In a prior life, I'll say, before I was in product management, I was actually in security research. And one of our customers, this is many jobs ago, had us do a penetration test of their application, their website. And we were able to get in with permissions and modify things on the website without proper authentication. And what it boiled down to is they were using an older version of Drupal, and they hadn't been upgraded because they did custom code changes to it. So they couldn't apply the latest versions, and they couldn't get those security fixes. And because of that, they were inadvertently leaving themselves exposed without realizing the impact of that. And that's why when Don was asking the questions, I said that you still need to test your stuff. Like even if you're using a system, like you're both right. Today, there's a lot of business intelligence systems they use, whether that's CRM like Salesforce, it's one of the dashboarding applications like Sense. Like those are generating code for you to use and you can see, but you still have to take some responsibility in making sure it's still secure, especially if you're putting it somewhere that it can be exposed outside of a very limited range of networking.
David,
hey, sorry, Carsten, go on.
I want to ask a question as well.
Yeah,
at least
sure.
Once a day. Because we don't usually have a guest that has knowledge, because the last guest that had knowledge, we made a member of our crew here. Yeah. So no, you are more coming from the software side of things, right? Because GitLab is more a software kind of company. And speaking of those morons here that basically come from the hardware or the social media side of things, they don't get the point. No, they get it. Don't get me wrong. They absolutely get it. But the point is, what I want to touch upon is, speaking of security, speaking of the news that you basically show. Isn't it time to think security a little bit more differently, more holistically, and basically touching on what Chris and Dom were basically referring to as well? On the other hand, isn't it time to lay security back into the hands of at least, or give users more control over their security? Isn't it about that time, or why isn't it happening?
That's a very great and loaded question. So to kind of take this from two different points of view, I think it's time to think of security differently than we have. That's honestly why I came to GitLab last year. I feel security has to start with your first line of code. So whether you are an analyst who tests software, whether you're a developer, whether you're a large company, a small company, doing side projects for yourself, like whatever the case is, security has to be there from the word go. And it's very easy to do that today. I'll give a minor plug for GitLab. Like we now include our Sas Scanning, so that's scanning your source code for vulnerabilities for free. Same thing with secret detection. So if we go back to that article that you pulled back up, right? Like you could be scanning and finding secrets before that code gets pushed out somewhere where somebody can take advantage of that. On the other side of that, I think that's not just a software problem, it's a world problem. I think security for a long time, and I've seen this trend back to being good, but it's kind of like, well, we do that at the end of a software release, or we pay a quarterly company to do a security audit or annual security audit.
Like we stitch it on later down the line.
Right. And you can't do that. It's got to be just part of your business, your personal life, whether it's, again, like I feel like I need show and tell because Chris said show and tell. So whether it's like your phone, you need to be making sure you're securing it because you have some onus in your own security. I think that answers your question, Karsten, kind of from the business and the personal side. Did I miss anything in what you were wanting? Or what you were asking, I guess I should say.
Would be easier to answer if I would unmute myself. Absolutely, it's absolutely the right direction, but I feel like we just got Dom started. Dom, please go ahead, take over.
No, I don't want to take over. Actually, just and actually ties in with the question that you. There's the phone. With the question that you also just raised, Carsten. So, for example, you just had the issue with the basically your local cloud storage that Chris just mentioned. That update came along, and suddenly you get this external dependency that you have to externally log in, etc. I'm using a similar system, but it was never allowed to talk to the internet in the first place. So it actually is only available in the local network here. So I haven't crossed this issue yet. Maybe I will once I hook it up. But the question that I want to also maybe for you, David. So seeing all these potential dangers and also how the kind of the tools that are accessing all these infrastructures are easily available. I mean, we are a round of experts here, so we discuss issues and we know about these weaknesses and we know about these failures. We will have a completely different understanding of password security, of use of password and password management, for example. But how can we make the people like aware in a broader scale? Because, for example, you will have the first, you already have the first really senior citizen that have their own like local storage for their family photos, etc. Because they get spammed from all sides, and then the phone is full, and you need to dump them somewhere. So you basically you hook up Nanny to some kind of storage device.
Your citizen, yes, yes.
But suddenly you have this like really, let's say, unfit user for a technical build level that suddenly just got itself.
Are you again speaking of Chris?
No, actually, I'm just speaking of how easy it is to overtake people without the right understanding of security. Maybe that's.
Yeah, I mean that's a good question.
Wait,
right?
David, before you answer that, I would just add one more question to that specific question, giving it a little bit different touch, because isn't part of what you do with GitLab basically related to what Dom was actually asking, not related to Chris being an expert on everything, but more like on the not so experienced user, or in that case, coder, trying to roll out things. I remembered last time when we were talking, you talked about some security measurements that you brought in place with GitLab, and we don't want to make a marketing show out of it, although it is. But please feel free to touch on that, because that is exactly what I feel like Dom was referring to. So feel free to bring GitLab in there.
Sure.
Just wanted to encourage you.
Yeah, so you're kind of touching on something I think is very key here. So being someone who's done security for a pretty long time, I used to have like nice hair, back when I started my career. Now I'm just bald. So so like I understand security, I understand the risk and whatnot. That's not the case for everyone. And so what we've done at GitLab is focused on making it as approachable as possible. And that's what we talked about last time on the Cloud Report video cast. So we have a component called Auto DevOps inside of GitLab, which is literally just a check button. And once you check that and hit apply, all applicable security scanners are set up for you with a recommended default policy. So if you don't understand security, but you need to be secure, it's a great place to start. So after you enable that, your first code commit within your merge request, you'll start seeing security results showing up. And we've done a very good job of when you click on them to read them, like let's say it says you've got a SQL injection. You're like, what the heck is a SQL injection? That sounds foreign to me. You can click on it. It's going to give you a description as to what it is, how to remediate it. It's going to give you links to education to understand it better, so you don't do that sort of mistake in the future. What I really like, what we've done is we've actually we'll point you to the line of code where the problem is. So that way, again, you don't have to go like, I have a SQL injection, where is that in my code? We go, hey, it's this line of code right here. Just go to that and you can begin to fix it. I agree. We should have SQL injection in 2022 run for an office somewhere in Europe. I think that'd be great. So that's what we have, and then that goes the whole way through the process. So whether it's the stack analysis, dynamic analysis, all that is tracked. If you then merge it, we keep track of those vulnerabilities. So that way they're actually in your main or default branch. I feel like we're really making security approachable and helping developers write more secure code. I've not met a developer who's been like, hi, I want to write vulnerabilities and get my company hacked. Like, I've not met a developer who said that. Right? But I do hear developers who say, I want to be better at this and I don't know where to start, or I want to be better at this, but I don't know how to fix it. And that's where we're coming in at. Up to and including where we can, you can click auto remediate and we'll auto remediate the vulnerability for you and show you what we did.
But isn't there some sort of a danger in that as well? Just from an outside perspective, I see two problems or potential problems there. One, I feel like you either use best practices or a code analysis, which could lead into the wrong direction from time to time. And secondly, aren't we ultimately empowering the developer? So basically, when I was young, like 50 years ago, somebody could please somebody.
No.
Thank you. That was exactly what I was looking for. That kind of contradiction there in regard to the age.
I just want to make sure I get introduced back, so I'm told I had to compliment you a bunch.
No, but the point is, when I was young, when I was starting to develop, I had to learn it the hard way in that regard. I had to learn what SQL injection is all about, what HTTP injection is all about, what have you is all about. Yes, Chris, I was young once. Isn't there a danger, a potential danger in perhaps doing that more or less automatically, so people just rely on that, sit back and enjoy it and say, yeah, GitLab is doing the hard way there, the hard job for me, so I don't have to care. Isn't that a potential danger in that regard?
Can I add that as kind of the new dimension? Because we've talked about this, it's trust. And that some companies feign trust with their users. Good example is WhatsApp versus Telegram. I don't know where it comes from. Yeah, people saying it, but Telegram is so much safer than WhatsApp. Prove it to me. Who does?
It isn't.
It
isn't.
No, it isn't. Actually not, if you think about it, but everybody will say that. So that's social engineering security based on trust.
Yeah, so I to kind of take those two things separate. So the first part of that, I've not met a developer who doesn't want to learn, whether that is learn the language better. Apparently you disagree, Carson, but
no, I do not really disagree. I'm just making my jokes out of that because frankly that's part of what makes a good developer, that kind of attitude towards learning. But on the other hand, let me put it that way, there are many developers that pretend to learn but prefer not to.
So what I would say is that, so I'll address the risk comment you made about the people won't learn. To me, we can't auto-remediate every vulnerability, right? We can auto-remediate certain types of vulnerabilities, but we can do that and explain what changed. And what I've seen in our customer base is that people are learning from that. So they don't see that vulnerability again. But if it comes back again, it's now a trended vulnerability. They can see, well, what did we do before to fix it? Why is it back? And it educates, right? Outside the auto remediation component, just the education alone. I don't run any engineering at GitLab, but my last several jobs, I ran engineering teams. And you're right, there's some developers who want to learn and they will go maybe too into learning because they want to learn a new language every month or once a year. And it's like, just get better at the one language we're using, right? And then you have developers who are hesitant to learn, and not that they don't want to learn, but they don't want to expose that they don't know something. And I think that experience all within their typical workflow in front of them, where they can say, I have this vulnerability, here's a public reference I can go read and understand it better. That seems to be helping. And we issue a every 6-month security report at GitLab. And we're seeing that some types of vulnerabilities are now trending down. And a lot of that, I believe, is because we've moved some of our security functionality into our free tier. So now it's not just, I work for a company that's paying for Gold or Ultimate from GitLab. It's, I'm a community contributor to any type of project, and I want to learn how to be more secure. And I can now see that because I can enable those scanners and see the output of them.
So basically, just in short, and frankly, I did not want to contradict you, although I would contradict you if you would say something that I don't agree with.
Contradict me as much as you want.
No. Yes, but no, not necessary in that regard. What I just want to add there is again, you can turn on those tools and they are awesome and they work great, but you would live in some sort of in some sort of false security kind of thinking if you feel like that would either make you getting rid of all of the security issues, because it can't. Secondly, it's still up to you to learn about that, to avoid those mistakes, to try to reach like zero security issues and vulnerabilities, although I think that's never possible because you don't control the whole stack ultimately end to end. But that is something I want to add to that, because I truly love that kind of integration with security. But on the other hand, look at the what was it, SonarQube thing. Look at that, because that is a tool that is perhaps running before or after something happened, or it's part of your build pipeline. And even if GitLab, for example, is, getting rid of all of the things I did wrong, that kind of default configuration, that kind of, I just roll it out and it's going to work. That thing is still there. And I used to say with cloud, you don't just scale your applications, you also scale your security issues. So every kind of vulnerability is basically getting scaled like hell in that regard, or potentially.
Can't we do the kind of community and open thing there? Because there is a thing called CVE compliance. So there is a general database where you can report vulnerabilities to, and even solutions if you might have them in a very general format. And it's more a question of, am I willing as a vendor, as somebody who creates software, portals, whatever it might be, am I willing to be CVE compliant or not? You know, where that's probably much more a kind of business economics topic, you know, what's it going to cost and what am I going to get out of it? But generally there are possibilities.
Also, I
think there's two interesting parts to this, right? So like Carson, I would state that there's no such thing as 100% secure. It's how good you are at trying to reduce your risk. Because you're right, there could be something that you're unaware of. But the reason why I like that article is because it talks about things that should be kind of things that people think to do, but sometimes forget, like changing default passwords, having password rotation policies, that sort of thing, right? But the second part of this is interesting too, because you're right, it requires you, and I'm talking to anyone who's watching this, it requires you to take a proactive stance with security. Back again, before I was in product management and I was a secure researcher, we did, and this works on Chris's comment, right? So we did a review of somebody's PCI compliance. And we got there and we were doing the physical search, and we came back and said, hey, the requirement says, I think it's like 6.3, could be changed now, but it was like, you must have a web application firewall in front of your web service, and they were an e-commerce company, to mitigate known security problems. And as we pointed that out, they said, "Oh, we have a web application firewall." Like, where is it? And they point to a closet. They said, "We bought it. It's in the closet." And I walk open and I open the door, and sure enough, it's sitting in the box, not even cut open. And I said, that doesn't meet the requirement. It says we have to have one. It doesn't say it has to be deployed online and sitting in line for the web application, right? So, like Chris is right. Like, you can meet whether it's SOX, GDPR, SOC 2, PCI, HIPAA. There's all these requirements, but it requires you as the person doing your job to keep security in the forefront of your mind. And I didn't mean to cut you off, Don. What were you going to add?
No worries. Actually, what I think is, it also ties into what you said. I don't think the responsibility for this tool is to take away all your security issues and worries. It's a huge step towards the right direction. Also, what we know is there rarely is a thing as 100% safe and secure, especially not given the long run of things with all the development cycles yet to come that we are unaware of and how things are prone to change in the future. But on the other side, and I think that's what I like about also how David explained it, it's very integrative to basically making people aware that they are part of the security. So security is not something that is detached and it's neither something you stitch on in the end to some product. It's not like the topping on a cake, that you just, in the end, you just add some security and put in the oven, all is fine. But that you as a person yourself, and the mindset that you are applying to any project is already part of security. And if you use these tools, and these tools help you to see your errors or the mistakes, like being open to or prone to specific setups, you get immediately the information to learn more about it. So basically your curiosity gets triggered and also supported. And then the next steps, you will start to flatten out these issues. So like raising a new mindset that takes security, just as we start in the beginning, to having security built in from the first line of code. So
I mean, it's so important what you're saying, because we have seen over the last years Meltdown, Spectre, Heartbleed, and that stuff that's been around for 20 years since kind of systems computing advanced. And that does come down to purely the mindset, because nobody was kind of safe from Heartbleed, Meltdown, Spectre, stuff like that. But if you had the right attitude, it wasn't so much a problem. And again, there was a CVE flagged for that, and you could fix it pretty fast if you were only willing to do so.
Mm.
Yeah, I think for people, and this is a struggle for myself. So for those who aren't Carsten, who've met me before, so I started off in healthcare as a IT person, securing data centers and whatnot, and that's what got me into security. But like back then, Chris, like you kind of touched on this, it's like you have to have that proactive mentality, because like when I started in healthcare, there were systems that were ancient that were still online and had not received security patches, right? Because they were like, I'm worried about availability. And there is a trade-off between your availability and security, but you've got to find the right overlap of those, because you might be able to say, hey, and I would hope nobody's still vulnerable to Heartbleed at this point, but hey, I have a system I can't patch right away to address Heartbleed, but I will proactively enable something in front of it, whether that's an intrusion prevention system, a web application firewall, something that is going to sit in front of it, and it's going to block the attack targeting that vulnerable system until I can upgrade it, right? So if you take that proactive mental approach, to your point, Chris, like security is a little less scary because you're thinking about it from day one. One thing I do want to mention on all this, and it's something I'm excited about, and I want to make sure I mention before the call's over here. But when I first talked to Carsten, we were talking about the fuzzing acquisitions GitLab had done. I'm very excited to tell everybody who's watching this, who may have watched the first conversation we had, that's all now available and integrated into GitLab. So our coverage guided fuzzing, so you can scan your source code for known vulnerabilities. Our API fuzzing is also all available. And I'm very excited about that, because it speaks to all of this. Whether it's Dom's concern about infrastructure, you can now test the APIs that your application is using for, whether it's infrastructure as code, cloud native, Kubernetes endpoints, you can begin to test those API endpoints you need to have to automate. It touches on the security part, that's the software part of it that Dom talked about. You can now get better visibility into what vulnerabilities you have. So I'm having a great conversation with all of you, and I just want to make sure I mention that because it's very exciting to have those things available within the pipeline so developers can find things earlier, as well as enable infrastructure teams to be able to test for that stuff when things are in production.
Cool. Thanks a lot for this update.
What I feel like is pretty important on that is it's basically part, and David touched on that. It's basically part of what you already get when you just use the free version. You don't have to pay for that, and I feel like that is pretty important because I myself wrote a comment on LinkedIn on our live show where I said it's not a solution, it's a mindset, and that basically adds to that. Security needs to be available everywhere. There's no way around that, and it should be at least a basic level of security. And basic is by no means a negative thing, but more like the common denominator should be available with every product. And frankly, that is part of the reason why, for example, my company chose GitLab over. Am I allowed to say that, over GitHub, for example? Because we feel like that is important. That is nothing that you can take for granted on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's nothing that you can basically ignore to some extent. It needs to be there, and it needs to be in your tools. It needs to be in your mindset. It needs to be part of your processes, having that as part of your build solution, as part of your CI/CD solution, of your perhaps even agile solution, because you can do Kanban, for example, with GitLab as well, is pretty important. And that's not about doing any kind of shameless marketing plug here. I feel like that is important. And specifically, given the fact that, and David, you don't need to react to that, given the fact that, for example, GitHub is Microsoft owned, let me put it that way, it does not feel right. It's not about the product, it's more about the mindset.
For world problems, everything, because they don't use master and slave as terms anymore, and they made the world a better place through that. Isn't that amazing what big monopolist companies can do for each one of us? Wow! Whew. But that's a different discussion. We can go into that some other time.
It is, by the way, before anybody gets that into the wrong understanding, we totally support that. But basically, if that is your approach towards the problems of the world, it's not enough. That's our point. And since our show is a lot of... Pardon me, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was saying I will avoid the whole GitHub and whatnot. You can speak for us on that. But I want to touch on one thing you did say. If I've learned one thing in my 15 to 20 years in security, is that we win when everybody contributes, everybody is part of that. And
open source.
That is true. Security people don't want the pressure of being the ones who have to find everything and find it sometimes when the application's in production. Ops teams want to know they're deploying something that's trustworthy, right? And developers don't want to write in secure code, except for apparently we learned a little bit ago, Carson likes to write in secure code. But besides him, everybody else doesn't want to do that, right? So if everybody's working together and security becomes a team sport, everybody wins. And I think that's key. And you touched on that briefly, Karsten, with what you were saying prior to plugging GitLab a minute ago.
I think that's something that all IT companies should have, like, gold embossed in the wall. Like, consider security a team sport.
Well, problem is they don't, and that's truly part of the problem. There's nothing more annoying than security, frankly. I'm a developer, and I have two enemies in this world. 3. First, the user. Okay, we can get rid of that one. Secondly, the ops guy, absolutely. And the common enemy is a security guy. And that is basically, if we can change that kind of mindset, that kind of thinking, that kind of approach, well, a lot of things would be more secure, more stable, and more trustworthy, because ultimately that's what we are aiming for, isn't it? Trustworthiness, security, and ultimately usable code, which is not open to the NSA, CIA, MI5, or what have you in this world.
And empowering the user and the developers along the way, so that they basically, make them feel empowered about their own security, also motivates them to pursue it. So I think that's a huge
I was
driver.
just say good that we have a social guy on the call, because I like you all of you developers and non-developers and coders and security people and front-end guys. You're all awesome.
Oh, awesome comment here. Awesome comment. If you get rid of the user, you get rid of ops and security as well. Well, let me put that way. Isn't that a quick win?
Well, I don't know about you, but I like to collect my paycheck and pay my mortgage.
It's highly overrated.
I love our users. I just make that clear.
But then again,
the security people too, and the ops people, you're all great.
Absolutely. Then again, what I just want to point out, because the comment that just dropped in was by Archie Gore, which is, by the way, CTO of Polyverse. And that again, no name dropping here. It's more like what I just want to reference there is, again, you need to have that kind of end-to-end thinking. So if I would imagine a truly secure end-to-end, exactly. If I would imagine a truly secure environment, my Linux would be secure, and not just because I configured it to be secure, more like because there are measurements and things in place. My vanilla stack, or for that matter, my SUSE stack, would be secure because we love you, because it would be, created with security in mind. It would be violet. Okay, that's it. Anyways, and my workload running on top of that is ultimately should be secure as well. So security is end to end. You cannot basically just say, okay, I make my Linux secure, or I make my vanilla stack secure, and everything else is insecure. It needs to be an end-to-end thing, and that is then again the thing that I feel like is so important, specifically with your workloads, and that is where solutions such as GitLab come into the game and play a pretty important role. But again, as we already said, it is now is a conversation going on here. What's going on here? We've never been that interactive.
Being more serious is a good or a bad thing. So I'm glad that Frederick asked the question. I do have some jokes which we could end on too, which are terrible jokes, but people like terrible jokes.
Let's do some terrible jokes in the end, because frankly, I feel like we are going to circle around, but not in a negative way. To me, again, end to end.
For everyone out there. So this was a really interesting show. What we wanted to tell you is, don't be a fool, wrap your tool.
Dun, dun, dun.
We managed to stay grown up for like a little bit more than an hour, and then Chris awaked.
I took notes. That's what I took from all of this.
David, do you have a bad joke in regards to security?
Yes, bad personality to bad jokes, passing the baton.
I don't have any bad security jokes. I have bad math jokes.
Oh, let's go ahead with that.
Probably work too. Okay, so what does a farmer use to till his fields? He uses a protractor. They have to.
Yes.
This is one in the theme of Chris wanting to make us a little less serious. What do you call a toilet being flushed on a second floor? Hypotenuse. Since they're working,
nice.
I'll do my last two since they're working. So, what does the big angle say to the small angle? Gee, you're a cute little angle. I told you they're terrible.
Oh, I love it. I love terrible jokes. The problem is I understand them. That's a true problem there.
Yeah, so Karsten, what did the one line say to the other line? Skew you.
Okay, I found a bad security joke. What's a hacker's favorite season?
What is a hacker's favorite season?
Fishing season. Yeah, I said it's terrible. Damn it.
I will go with the math jokes.
Guys, it's not going to be to become anything better. And frankly, from the room next to my room, I hear a watcher laughing all the time. It's making me crazy because it's like half a minute later or a minute later you get like and you say, okay, no, we already moved on. So any more bad jokes from anyone? Audience?
I always have to Google bad jokes.
Isn't that a bad thing to Google something?
Why is it a bad thing to Google something?
I would use DuckDuckGo.
I use Google.
They
already have my life. You know, it doesn't matter.
I would say I have a Gmail account, so I've already turned over all my personal privileges to them. So
Android, got a Gmail. Then I use Bing.
Awesome. What could possibly go wrong?
The guy who does that.
Guys,
the guy who uses Bing. That's cool.
No, actually, I just love this. I don't know. One speaker basically opened his talk with what you do is you start Edge, you go on Bing, then you download Chrome and Google for your results.
So just funny tech news at that point. So I've said something maybe halfway intelligent. Microsoft released the Microsoft Flight Simulator, which is an ultra-realistic and awesome flight simulator which takes live map data and puts it into your virtual world. And Bing sucked so bad at that now Microsoft is using Google to power its flight simulator.
Great decision.
Right? Making good choices on that part.
And actually, it's so awesome to see how this product, Flight Simulator, has developed over the decades. So I still think it's one of the really great, classic, good franchise, like an old brandy or a good red wine. So I think this one really ages awesome. So considering what technologies they have integrated along the lines, I mean, I still remember being on the Flight Simulator somewhere in the 90s. When you had this rough models of your own cities that you could download, or basically not download but purchase, because download on ISDN, yeah, sure. So yeah, and now basically evolved to this, where you have this photorealistic options and scenarios. I think that's quite interesting. We could do a whole episode just on this.
Yeah, perhaps we do that in the next episode. We could just do an episode by flying around with Flight Simulator on our Windows machines. Always a good idea. Let's just do that. But let's first of all end this show with grace. So, David, thank you for joining us, because it was a true pleasure. And frankly, you made that show. I've read some comments in between. You made that show a serious one. Thank you for that. I'm not too sure if I'm grateful for that, but thank you.
I was wondering whether or not we got the answer to Frederick's question, whether or not they liked the serious tone. But I'm glad to be able to provide some education, humor, and I guess seriousness.
No, Frankie.
I think it was great. Thanks.
That's exactly what I wanted to say.
It's been a pleasure meeting you in this virtual way. So.
It was very awesome, and this show, being more serious, just shows, I really respect what other herically challenged people have to say. So I was really interested. I didn't have time to make as many jokes as usual.
Herically disabled, you wanted to say? Guys, let's stop it here. It's not getting better. David, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Chris, Dom, as always, the pleasure. Audience, check back next Tuesday, 5 p.m. CET, and whatever your time zone might be. We love you. We love you, David. We love our show, and stay secure for this week.
Stay safe, take care, and
over and out.